us will show up eventually. We're live. We are live. This is Senate Finance. We are going to move through this as quickly as possible. So when everybody gets here, we will have to talk about, are we going to meet on Monday, probably Monday afternoon? If not, I think you can assume we will not be out of here by 4 o'clock, as much to the chagrin of my other chair, who was trying to have a committee meeting or committee dinner this evening. But we will have to work into the evening because we have just a lot of territory to cover. So we're going to start with John, who we haven't been able to get. He finally got released from Ways and Means. Go over his section of the Senate bill. And I think we all have copies of it. But John actually is covered sections that are our jurisdiction. So we will go over those. And then Julia is making up for us, and we're going to put it on the whiteboard, whoever has the best penmanship, of things we need to decide, and then under that, things that we might need to decide before we can decide, and implications of what we decide. And we will go through that until we are finished. So John, where do you start at in 23?
Just a second. That's.
Remembering
Are you doing that side by side or bill?
Just the bill. It's
Is that an ad bill?
you're correct. Section 23.
Is this draft number 9.1?
That's right.
Thank you.
So John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I can explain high level even before we look at the text, what the changes proposed are. And so the full extent of changes that Senate Education proposed in my sections, which are the foundation formula and then leads into the homestead exemption, supplemental district spending, those pieces. Senate Ed didn't touch supplemental district spending or the repeal of property tax credit and homestead exemption, but did touch the foundation formula. And basically what they changed are the inputs. So they changed what that base amount is. You'll recall you had that 15,033 cost factor base amount from the House. You have a new figure here, and then they have different sets of weights provided in the foundation formula, including so in current law, we recognize a number of weighting categories. English language learners, we recognize grade level weights. We recognize federal poverty level, so economically disadvantaged, sparsity, and small schools. The House version replaced the small schools and sparsity weights with small school and sparsity support grants. And then they created distinguished levels of English language learner weights based on my proficiency level and newcomer or student with limited or interrupted formal education. They created special education weights. What the Senate did is a different approach to the weights. They do not have a special education weight, and I'm going to show you the text. I just think it's easier to say outright what the changes are. The Senate Education Committee does not have special education set of weights. They maintain the census block grant, and they intend, I think, to address special education in the future. They do maintain the same English language learner weights as were passed in the House. So it has distinguished by English language proficiency level and that newcomer slight additional weight. They have a different base amount as mentioned. They use the same economically disadvantaged weight as the House. And then they have some grade level weights proposed, whereas the House had no grade level weights. The basic way to think about the difference was that the House followed the memo that Dr. Colby published, and I think you guys had testimony on this yesterday, and the Senate did not, and negotiated the figures within committee based on, in part, the adjusted EB model that was presented in the Education Committee by the APA consultants for the administration.
With an enhanced EV model, John?
I don't, that could be correct. It could be enhanced. My terms are not
We are
qualitative.
going, I've asked Ezra to put that in the same little block form that everything else was in, so we can
That will make it look too official,
do
Madam
a
Chair.
more direct comparison. The committee who wasn't here, I'm going to ask for committee of conference on, I think it's S51, our caregiver tax credit. Because they struck our credit and put several other credits on, so I will ask for a committee of conference when that comes over, probably tomorrow.
Maybe what they did.
Yes, so, yeah. They put all the other tax credits, well, no, they will, yeah, we'll walk through it.
Okay, so here is the report from Senate Education, and I'm starting in section 23. This is page 50.
Where's guys like climbing through out of a hole out there? We weren't.
There's an
Okay.
step down and an entrance into the basement out there.
Used to be a bar underneath appropriations in here. The liquor bar.
It used to be.
Is that how you got
Before
there?
my time.
Still, they got that special part.
The entrance was from appropriations, not finance. I got your email stuff. Is it?
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna try to be efficient and just change this against what was received from the House, if that is okay with you guys. So we're in the first section here, we're talking about in Title 16 of state funding of public education chapter. We've walked through this language before, but we've walked through the concepts here before. What you see, just think of here is this $14,870 figure for your base amount. This is on page 51. The House version had that 15,033, and we just talked about the change that resulted in that.
15, what's in between?
From the House, it was 15,033.
15,033.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the base amount you see here is 14,870. Section 24, we're on page 52. This is the primary location where changes have occurred. So this is changing your use. And what you'll see is building in the English language proficiency levels and newcomer or SLIFE categories. We have walked through this language before when we walked through the House bill. So this is pulling in those refinements of the EL weight. Basically, it provides for different level weights based on where your proficiency in English is. And you can get an additional weight on top of that if you are a newcomer or student limited or your own education. What you don't see here and what you will see in the House version is those sets of categories for students with disabilities, which that with their special education weight is. So there's no special education weight proposed in this bill. We can, you can see on the following page that we're in you can think about the weighting section as divided into a couple of steps that the Secretary of Education has to take. So first they need to count the folks who fall into particular categories, and then they apply weights to the count within the categories to develop that weighted long-term membership, which is the end output of this section. So what you're seeing here is we're in the count section, and this is just saying count up in these levels of English language proficiency level. And one thing that you do see is there are some levels that are counted together, and that's because the same weight is applied to those. So if you're in level 2 or 3, you're just in one bucket. Same for 5 or 6, they receive the same weight. We can see what we have here is your count for sparsity what I would say is that you do not have a sparsity weight provided in this bill. But the reason a sparsity count is provided is that the small school weight, as you'll remember in existing law, has a sparsity kick-in, right? You only have access to that small school weight if you meet a particular level of sparsity. And so we need to have a count of sparsity to get at that. And what you see here is one sparsity count. It's not these distinguished levels, right? It's just identify all school districts that have low population density measured by the number of persons per square mile residing in the land area equaling fewer than 55 persons per square mile. So that is our sparsity concept. It doesn't break out between fewer than 36, 36 to 55, 55 to 100. It's just, are you fewer than 55? We'll see this again when we come to the actual small school weight. We do retain here, and so you have a count for small schools. We do retain the small school weight in a modified form. And so you do need a count for your small schools. But what you see is in current law, we distinguish between fewer than 100 and 100 to 250. And here your small schools are just those with fewer than 100 pupils.
100 to 250 is going to be a lot of schools in the state.
Yes, and I will say in the, hopefully I qualify the correct name, enhanced EV model, there was a proposed weight associated with 100 to 250. And that weight was unlike the other weights, which are static figures, right? You get 0.21 for this, you get 0.5 for that. For 100 to 250 pupils, they had basically a descending weight that would decline from whatever the weight is at 100 incrementally down to 0. So it's a variable formula, and the math produced negative figures where it likely was not intended to produce negative figures. That is why this is not
Not here.
included.
Okay.
Okay. So your actual weights themselves, we can come to page 56. I have added something that I hope is useful in the future if this is what is embraced, which is just little subsection headers to describe what weight bucket you're in. So first you see grade level weights. The House had no grade level weights. And here you see you receive different weights based on 6 through 8, you get 0.02. And if you're in one of 9 through 12, you get 0.10. So grade level weights for those in 6 through 8 and those 9 through 12. And note that these are all additive. So you accumulate these sets. Your economic disadvantage weight is next. You see a slight tweak to what is in existing law, but obviously we're talking about different kinds of weights. In current law, we have tax capacity weights, something different here. We do have the same figure that was what the House had. So this is, aside from the slight deviation for having a subsection header, this is the same concept as the House had, an economic disadvantage weight of 1.02. Your EL weight, we've hit on this when we were talking about the pupil counts. This is broken out based on first your English language proficiency level. We've walked through this concept before. This is the same weighting as you saw in the House proposal. And same piece here for EL newcomers life, same weighting as proposed in the House. So tied to that memo from Dr. Colby.
But it's a different base. So
It is
they have a different
Yes.
amount.
Exactly, and it is part of a system of weights, right? The other weights of which are not drawn from that memo, right? Because like, for instance, your small school weight was not part of the Dr. Colby memo. So even if you have the same base, you have different weights produced. So it's in the aggregate producing different
It's a
outcomes.
different end cost.
Exactly. You have your small school weight set up here. Again, in the House version, you had a small school sparsity support grant. And again, we see our sparsity kick in. So if the number of persons per square mile within the land area of the geographic boundaries is fewer than 55, your weight is provided, that is 0.21 as in existing law for that small school weight. And note, you can see we've struck this 100 to 250 pupils. Sub 6 is just a directive to add all those weights to produce the weighted long-term membership. So that is your weighting section. The other thing to call out on page 59 is that in the House version, this subsection H is a recalibration type section that asks for regular reexaminations of these numbers, the inputs, and specifically the House version called out to look at, base, transportation reimbursement, and weights. Here, this language is struck because to recalibrate, you need to have a duplicable methodology from which to work. And in this case, I don't know that you have that, so that's why that's gone.
Okay, standard matter, standard improvement.
Just real quick on the number 5, small school weight. So that's fewer than 55.
This varsity.
For sparsity, and it cuts out the 100 people. 100 pupils, so
yes.
it's just the 55 per square mile.
Sorry, what you should think of them as two separate, there's a sparsity kick in to access the small school weight, that's your fewer than 55. And then what counts as a small school in existing law can be under 250, and it distinguishes between 100 to 250 and sub 100. And what you have here is your sparsity condition to get in is fewer than 55, and your small school has to be fewer than 100 pupils. So it's not that the small school needs to have fewer than 55 pupils, that's just your sparsity.
Right.
And then your small school itself is one with fewer than 100 pupils.
Because it's crossed
Crossed
out.
out.
Because the count that we do at subdivision B3C, and I can scroll up to this if helpful, removes those additional categories. Yeah, when we identify all school districts that have one or more small schools, we're just identifying those with an average 2-year enrollment of fewer than 100 pupils. So that's all that will be in that bucket.
Okay, so to be a small school, you're fewer than 100 people, students, and you are in a sparse district.
Exactly. And the sparse district is now this just fewer than 55.
Per square mile.
Yep.
All right,
Exactly. So, but it's helpful to think of them as two different categories, right? To access the small school weight, you need to be in a sparse district.
right, but a sparse district is a sparse district.
Exactly. Separate from what's.
We may or may not do something for it. Okay,
Thank you. Chair Cummings.
yes.
John, thanks. I was wondering, I didn't get to ask Senator Baumgartz and I wanted to, but given that the architects or the authors of the outcomes-based foundation formula didn't include weights for high school and middle school, do you remember what the rationale was for putting these in?
Oh, the specific grade level weights?
Yeah,
I think that Senator Baumgartz would have a good answer as to why he did that, and I think that Senator Beck may have this. I don't want to.
Well, what I know is that we're 0.39 right now. In January, Professor Colby recommended 0.25. In April, she recommended 0. The allowable tuition report from the AOE indicates 12.5% is the difference between pre-K through 6 and 7 through 12. And I think it was
The APA.
APA.
Exactly.
They looked at it and they thought that 0.1 was an appropriate amount of weight because of the need for college and career readiness that is needed in secondary school. And that's where the 0.1.
College, so we have conflicting expert.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we were 0.125 before back from 27, then we were 0.39, then it was 0.25, then it was 0. It's all over the
It's all over the board. Okay,
That's
a good look.
it's a clarifying question. When you say college and career readiness, do you mean counseling? What aspect of college and career readiness are you referring to?
I would not have that level of detailed knowledge to speak to what those, yeah.
And Senator Beck is correct. These specific numbers are drawn from that APA model.
I think it's important to understand that the weights that Senator Beck was just referring to are not an apples to apples comparison. Currently, it's based on and you know this very well, it's based on a tax capacity model. And so the weights are not
Right.
equivalent weights. And can't be compared directly. Then I think you were mistaken in saying that Dr. Colby recommended a weight in February or January. She was simply providing examples based on the previous data, sort of examples of how a foundation formula would work. It is not a recommendation. And then the weight that she did actually recommend in April was based on updated data that included data up through the 23-24 school year, and also included data from 2018 through 23-24. So included all of the data that would have been taken into consideration of the mergers through Act 46, and then the impact of the COVID pandemic on our schools. So that data is much more updated than the data that was being used for her example that she gave to the Ways and Means Committee in January, February. There's a different data set, it's a different analysis. Her one in January, February is not a recommendation.
It's all right there in the presentation. I mean, it's,
All right,
there's kind of very a lot of detail, so.
we do have weights from the school now, right?
0.39.
We have in our tax capacity, but that's based on the
Right, tax
pupil weighted
capacity.
study data that was up through 2018.
Was moved through John's section because he may get called to the Capitol bill. We could discuss.
So I'm gonna skip over sections that you guys have already seen and that are the same as the house and that I walked through when I did my first semester. So we don't need to talk about section 25. We should talk about section 26. This is new language that the Senate Education Committee added for what happens when you roll out the foundation formula. As you know, in this proposal, the rollout of the foundation formula occurs July 1, 2027. So that's your fiscal year 28. What happens to school districts in the fiscal years 28 through 2030? What this says is that in each of those years, you get an adjusted educational opportunity payment. And the way that it works is, I'll show you the language, but just to describe the concept. If your FY25 education spending for your school district is below the educational opportunity payment as would be calculated under the foundation formula, you are incrementally moved over the course of those years towards your educational opportunity payment. So if you're below, you're moved upwards. If your FY25 spending is above your educational opportunity payment, you are incrementally moved downward. And so the way mechanically this works is the EOP shall equal the EOP for the school district as calculated plus a yearly adjustment. And I say plus, but note that the yearly adjustment can be negative, right? If you're subtracting your number. So you're adding a yearly adjustment. It makes for this super clean language where you just, in your fiscal year 28, you're going to get whatever that gap is, multiplied by 0.75. So you're getting 3/4 of that gap to take you either up or downward towards your educational opportunity payment. In fiscal year 29, you get half of the gap. So it's moving you closer. In fiscal year 2030, you get 1/4 of the gap. And then in fiscal year 31, you're fully onto your educational opportunity payment. Something that is worth noting here is while your FY25 education spending is flat, that's a historic number, right? From which you're calculating this transition gap, which is the gap between your educational opportunity payment and your FY25 spending. The other figure, your educational opportunity payment, is not a static number that would change each year, right? So what you're actually determining for your transition gap, it may not be as smooth as you're intuitively imagining, where you're literally getting 75% this year, 50% this year, 25, because the educational opportunity payment against which the gap is being determined will be affected by your weighted long-term membership in any given year. But treating it as a clean proxy to try to get at transitioning people smoothly to that. And the way that the math works, you've seen this language a million times, so I don't think I have to talk about this, but the transition gap, how do we get that number that works out, whether positive or negative, to produce an addition of the yearly adjustment? Your transition gap is the amount, whether positive or negative, that results from subtracting your EOP from your ed spending in FY25, and that produces the smoothing across those transition years. I had really hoped to have a PowerPoint where I could show exactly how that works, but I hope that that makes sense.
We've used that system
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
So that is the full of the transitionary measures for FY 28 through FY 30. And again, in FY 31, you would be fully transitioned. Everyone would receive their educational opportunity payment as calculated under the foundation formula. That is really the full extent of the Senate changes that I have, as against the House. So I'm happy to scroll through pieces if you would like to talk. I know that you are shortly going to be talking about the homestead exemption, so if it's helpful for me to jump to that language, I could, but I don't know that that is helpful. So just whatever would be helpful to you guys.
I think having you walk through the homestead exemption section. Because that is one we're going to be, that's one they did not touch, right?
Exactly.
So that is one that we have the House version. It's in here. We've had some additional walkthroughs. We've had Julia show us impact on different income and house value groups. Remember food colors, who was impacted. But hopefully we'll refresh that because that is one that we're gonna need to make a decision on.
Okay. So we are then on section 40, which is on page 84. And the first set of language that you're going to see here is just would provide statutory purposes alongside property tax credits or exemptions and the like. So that's what you're seeing here is your statutory purpose section. There's some cleanup related to the change for the homestead. What we're adding in, as you see here, statutory purpose of this proposed homestead property tax exemption is to reduce the property tax liability for Vermont households with low and moderate household income.
Now, this is what would be replacing the present income sensitivity.
Exactly.
program, which under this new structure, I'm told, doesn't work unless we do things to make it. I think I know that, but we'd have to alter the present income sensitivity structure because we're going to remove.
We removed, yeah, and that's what this section 41
This
is.
is in place at the present.
Exactly. So your Title 32, Chapter 154 is where we currently have the homestead property tax credit and renter credit. And what you're seeing here is the repeal of the statewide property tax credit. There is a municipal property tax credit, right? There's a municipal circuit breaker. Both of those are retained.
That's at 47, right? In the laws, that municipal circuit.
Exactly. But you are replacing the statewide, that property tax credit and the statewide circuit breaker with this proposed homestead property tax exemption. So you're going to see a lot of cleanup language here. And we have walked through this before, so hopefully this will look familiar, but just to refresh. You're seeing changes here to represent as municipal because you're getting rid of statewide, right? Here we go. The homestead property tax exemption. This is a reduction in the amount of house site value. And just the flag for you guys for the property tax credit and for the exemption, we're referencing specifically the house site value, which is a reduced category as against what a homestead is, right? This is your domicile plus the 2 acres surrounding. This is what's currently used for the property tax credit. So this is the current construct that we use for our income sensitivity measures. I just want to make that clear because sometimes folks think we're talking about a broader parcel for a homestead.
You're not
This is
talking about the 12 acres that you own behind that.
exactly. This is just the house site value. So what you would receive is a reduction in the amount of house site value, not the other extent of the parcel that you have as your homestead. A reduction in the amount of house site value subject to the same education tax and the supplemental general spending tax. So it is an exemption against both kinds of education property taxes, both your statewide, which is generating that base funding amount and foundation for the amount, and also whatever is done locally, which is through that supplemental district spending tax. So an
So your
exemption.
tax bill that
Yep.
comes to your house.
Yeah, but just wanted to make clear, it isn't just against your
Yeah.
statewide, right?
On this and previous point, is it contemplated that the municipal, there will still be a property tax credit from the municipal portion of tax bills?
The municipal property tax, you can have a credit against that. Yep.
That's current form.
As current- as
Homesteading
current law.
and non-homestead. So we could, but we can't do that with this foundation formula.
I'm not sure this is just an alternative approach as to how to do income sensitivity. And so the approach is to repeal the property tax credit and use an exemption, but it doesn't disrupt the municipal, there's a municipal property tax, right? And that's what you're getting a credit against is your municipal property tax, not your statewide.
The
Education
47,000 circuit breaker right now limits the percentage of your income, but both state and municipal. So the taxes charged to you. This is putting all the state taxes under this homestead exemption. Your municipal taxes still can't. And we might want to look at that because your municipal taxes probably aren't. Even in Montpelier or Barry, probably not going to get that.
But I've heard in hallway conversations that under this new scenario with the foundation formula, it would not be possible to continue what we currently have with property tax credit, the homestead and non-homestead. Is that?
I see Julia hankering to get in.
Go, Julia.
Yeah, Julie Ricker, JFO. Yeah, I think that what you're referencing, Senator Chittenden, is that the current, so to John's point, the municipal property tax credit, the circuit breaker is paid out of general fund, distinct from the education fund property tax credit and income sensitivity. The reason that our current income sensitivity that exists in statute could not be maintained as it exists in current law is because the foundation formula completely does away with the homestead property yield and the per pupil spending adjustment. So the income yield, currently the property tax credit is being calculated by taking the locally adjusted income, education income tax rate, how much would be paid under that versus the locally adjusted homestead property tax rate. When you no longer have a local adjustment to your income education tax, nor an instant yield, there would need to be some changes made in order to calculate a property tax credit if you wanted to maintain it.
You know, the PTC if the foundation formula goes.
We could do a different kind of PTC. It's just that the current mechanism doesn't function. So if we wanted to stay with a tax credit instead of a tax exemption, we'd have to restructure the tax credit.
Right.
But the exemption is what was proposed by the governor and what the House included and the Senate didn't change it so far. So,
And we had testimony on that last Thursday or Friday. About certain values of houses are better houses in some areas than others, and there's pros and cons. To all of this.
Thank you.
And when we get to when you see the struck language for the repeal, if I see the mechanics for adjustment and the like, I can point them out so that you, yeah, you see. Some technical cleanup here. We walked through this before. This is just for gendered language. My trackpad is something.
Which pronouns and now we're going to.
We're just using the claimants. We have talked before about this update to the timing piece, right? We talked before how sometimes people are not, they don't gain access if they purchase a house after a particular time of the year, access to the credit. There's an attempt here to get it some leeway for someone to avail themselves of the homestead exemption. But we've talked this concept before, but that's what you're saying here is try to extend the benefit a little bit later in the year for someone purchasing the house so they aren't deprived of the value in the year in which they're going to have to pay property taxes on their new property. Conforming changes to pick up the new exemption and reference the credit exclusively as the property tax credit. If you're fine with me just saying these are conforming changes, then we walk through this. I can. Fine. Yeah. I think the real core of what we're trying to get at is this here. Section 6066, we're on page 90. You're going to see a bunch of struck language for the existing income sensitivity measures. And so this is the structure that we currently have that has different income brackets that are much wider spaced. And as you can see, they do things like pull in this income percentage. That's something, a concept we would no longer have in a new system, so that mechanic would no longer be available to produce this property tax credit. You see the different income brackets here, and again, just calling it a wider space than what you're going to see in the proposed homestead exemption here. So 47K to 90. Again, same mechanic, and you have a different cap, right? Above you see 225 as your household cap, and here 400. As your income gets lower, you are seeing a greater. It's not applied against your income until above that 400K figure. I will jump down to the actual mechanics themselves, so you can see the smoother curve that's resulting from switching from this property tax credit to this specific concept of a homestead exemption. So eligible claimant who owned the homestead on April 1 shall be entitled to a homestead property tax exemption. The claimer in an amount determined as follows, and then we break it out based on income and house site value. So for someone who is at a household income, which again, we're talking about a distinctive concept here. It's not your individual income, it's those in the household. For a claimant whose household income is equal to or less than 25,000, exemption is 95% of the house site value. Again, that's your domicile plus 2 acres surrounding. So quite high exemption for someone in that bottom income bracket.
With outside value with no restriction, or is
There's no cap proposed here.
it could be $2 million house?
Exactly. Exactly. As currently structured, there is no cap. This could be a quite expensive house at which you're receiving a 95% income.
If your income
Yeah.
lower.
If your income is less than 25, which if you are wealthy, right, potentially.
Scott, I'm gonna interrupt you, and Scott, you have to leave shortly.
At 4.
Oh, I thought,
No,
no,
4
you
o'clock.
said 3.
Oh, then I mistyped it, sorry.
Okay. All right, because at some point we need to talk about Monday. So everyone can think about Monday.
On this, I just remember Chair Kornheiser really highlighting this as something that they just didn't have time to finalize, but I fully support putting a cap on this. I'd love for it to be somewhat sensitive to different parts of the state. Chittenden County has much higher median house values versus the rest, but at minimum, I had a quick Google of what the median and a mean household value or price in Vermont is. It's like 412 and 393. So I mean, even just putting a $400,000 cap, I think it's just good policy. Because I don't want to pass out of here something that somebody with a $3 million home, but doesn't have any income, but just has lots of wealth. I don't want them exempting all $3 million of that luxury estate. It just doesn't seem like a policy.
Are you saying the cap of the value that you get the exemption is 400?
Or something variable in some rate, but somewhere in that ballpark. Make it 750, make it a million, but some cap.
Because I figure, I think my house on the books in Milton, which is very middle of the road house, is like 375. So I think you're gonna cut out a lot of property in the state.
They'd still get
Especially
up to that. They'd still get $400,000 exemption, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. We're gonna talk about the number, and I know Representative Kornheiser told me there was negligible impact when you went above 5. I mean,
right.
that
But $10,000.
I assume Trustafarian, who's living in a $3 million ski condo, but only drawing down 20,000 a year till he needs to buy a Porsche. May exist out there. The question is to move to New Hampshire for the year. He needs to buy the Porsche and then come back.
I think there are 2 ways. I completely agree that we should have a cap. I mean, just out of fairness alone, even if it does save a little bit of money if you put a cap in, not as much as you might want it to, but it does save some money. And there are 2 different ways you can put a cap in. You can either cap the amount that the value of the home, say you're not going to do it for homes that are above it, or you can say that you get the credit on or the deduction on the first X number of dollars of value. So like you can say the first $500,000 value of your home, you get that credit.
That's what we do.
Yeah, and I think that
They are 2 different.
There's just different
The first one is
approaches,
to say that you could receive 500K in total exemption value. The second is to say that you could receive a percentage of exemption against the first.
And this one's doing.
Right. Or there are three different ways then, yeah, actually, because you could cap the house value, the amount you get, or the amount of the credit. So those are three different ways of capping it.
Not
And
credit.
yeah, and so I think that the way to do it, I think, is the amount of the first like 500,000, you could get that, but beyond that, you'd have to pay 100%.
The percentage of the 500,000.
Yeah.
So you could get 95% if you're 25,000 and your house is worth 600,000. You could get the exemption on the first $500,000 of that value of the home. And the next 100,000, you would have to pay 100%.
That's what this is doing, right?
Well, this has no cap, but what it would
Yeah,
look like just
but it-
intuitively would be like the exemption shall be 95% of the first $500,000 in value of the claimant's house site value. So that's that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
All right.
And then I think it also avoids the differentiation in property values because the and more so.
I don't want to tax people out of their homes, but if they're living in that nice of a home, then I think they should contribute fairly in paying property tax and stuff.
Once it gets adjusted in some.
Under current law, they're not protected over 40,000.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
We have
that yeah, we haven't
Since 2018.
increased it for a couple of years and especially with the real estate values going up. That's why I was thinking 500,000 might be the better level.
We have not adjusted anything in this to deal with that sudden increase in housing values we saw during COVID.
Right. And we could
Yeah.
even put an inflator on it, and if we come up with but it shouldn't be the NEPA, because that's based on labor costs. We need to have an inflator that works for real estate costs, and I'm not sure what that is, but
There's one, I'm sure the National Association of Realtors has a standard, inflator. Zillow will give you one, but
let's not go to Zillow,
No, I
our
don't.
expert.
considering after they listed my daughter's house in Montpelier, took all the information on the house from the Montpelier lister site and then listed it in Newport.
What?
Damn.
Oh my gosh.
And 3 attempts to remove it failed.
Yeah.
I finally put a sign on the front lawn.
This is not Newport.
I mean, I knew I had to check where they put it on the local map. They had it in the right spot on the map. They just listed it in the wrong town. And why, I have no idea.
On the point that Senator Hardy just raised, which I agree to, I remember my first year on Senate Transportation suggesting an auto inflator of DMV fees, and Senator Mazza shut that down really quick because I said that it's not really good practice to have auto inflators. But is this something different that we're contemplating of both the base amount and then possibly for this? Can you think of other examples in our statutes where we auto increment certain amounts used in
It's called
tax?
the fee bill.
And we do things for like our certain grants and the like, right? Like if we set in statute a $6,800 categorical base amount, right? We want to have inflators so that over time they're picking up the changes in those years. And then if you think in particular about just the concept behind an income sensitivity measure, right? You think of the economics as explaining why someone belongs in the income sensitivity recognized measures as changing over time. So I should think conceptually as tied to do the economic conditions justify a regular update and
Yeah,
that.
I mean, economics, the housing market historically has been what goes up comes down.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
And so it hasn't crashed yet. But if it's going to follow the national trend, the historic trend, it's going to come down, and those $500,000 might be worth $300,000 in a month.
Exactly. So then if we put an inflator on it, it's not an inflator, it's an index.
It's an
And so
index or
the
adjustment.
index could go down,
Okay.
as property values go down as well.
So we like this system rather than the new one with some adjustments, like a cap on the housing value, an index maybe, as long I'm thinking of my folks who will probably, I think I feel better if we up the income level a little bit.
Well, so if we put the cap on, we might be able to save enough to be able to up the income level.
Because we haven't adjusted that, and
Yeah,
now that I have a real estate town, I actually have had one. I'm starting to understand that the very small percentage of people, less, my ski town is 23% of year-round residents. And that's a high. The other ones are even lower. That many of those people are working in the stores and they are not high income people. But a shed is worth $300,000 in that area. And I want to make sure we get the levels right, because there are people that are actually making a low income, and then urban legend says there are some trustafarians with huge trust funds that are living in an uninsulated shed and raising organic goats, but I don't know any of them, and I can't write the law on those.
where do you get these stereotypes now?
And they were very tuned in to urban legends. Trustafarian was a big word. But that was probably back in the 90s. But we've had those show up when you got a cash rebate sitting literally on their porch in front of their, in those days, probably $500,000 condo with the rebate check from the state. Because once you purchase those things, if you're living on just what you draw down from your investments, you can live at a fairly low income if you're comfortable with it until if you pay cash for your condo or house, you can live at a fairly moderate income level until you need a new Porsche or whatever, both. And then you're up for a year and then you're back down. And we've got a couple of those. They've shown up, less so since we've made adjustments, but they have in the past.
What's important, though, that I understand, I know JFO is right behind us here, is that I think what the House sent us actually has the tax exemptions of $45 million costs. And so I don't know if we want to necessarily equalize it and give the money back lower, whereas we let owners to bring that down. I also think I heard that if we cut it, that $45 million cost, if we cap it at putting words in people's mouths, what I heard in conversation, if we cap it at 500, it might say 5 million, cap it at 400, say 10 million. That's real money when it comes to our ed fund. So I just don't know if I want to take that and put it back in if it's already got that $45 million price.
Right, I mean, obviously that's a consideration, but I think we also haven't changed. I guess we've changed the 115 recently, but this goes up to 115.
Sure.
And I was thinking, could we get it to go up to 125, which is the level that we use for a lot of other tax credits and tax things. Can we use that 5 million to get it to be able to go, and also smoothing out the there's this like weird, change in that the way the House did it, and could we smooth it out, have the house site value, maybe it's 450, I don't know. But then, and then get it to go up to 125,000. That's what I'm thinking.
Is the discussion we're going to have probably 11 o'clock at night next Thursday or Friday.
We could do it now and just have
Well, we
John
can do
draft
it now, but there's several things we need to do it in context.
No, we just
There are other moving parts that are going to cost money.
That will all cost a lot.
Yes, and we have, part of the reason we're doing this and part of the governor's mandate to us is we're supposed to be trying to lower the cost, at least over time. Because we've established we're going from a cost base, which is what it costs now, to a future state evidence-based, which doesn't exist yet, system. And so we've got to. And yet, at some point, we're gonna have to look at the overall cost of the system, and that's when you wanna get into, do we lose? You know, does this cost 10 million or 12 million, and I need 2 million to do something else here to make this work? So this is on the list of those levers. No, I'm not gonna vote OPR out today. And at 3:30, I've got a whole bunch of people coming for the OPR bill, so we'll do that. And then we'll go back to committee discussion. So let's let John,
Okay.
because I'm told it's gonna take an hour to go through the OPR bill.
Okay, it's just showing you the brackets. You can see the one that Senator Marty was identifying, this 47 to 50. It's one of the oddities. So you could change these bracket levels, and you know the highest value. You see that these are dropping in increments of exception available, right? 40 to 30 to 20% exception available. Your topmost is this 110 to 115. In that case, an exemption of 10% of the claimant's house site value. Recall at the very bottom, if you're that sub 25K, you get up to 95%. So it's 95% down to this 10% if you fall within the income sensitivity measures. And then if you're above it, if you're greater than 115K, there is no house site value exemption available. Other pieces here, what you can see is holding on to that municipal circuit breaker, the municipal property tax credit. This is the repeal of the statewide, that statewide property tax circuit breaker, but you do hold on to the municipal piece. And then we have this language included to ensure that this doesn't reduce the house site value of the yield. So you're not getting an exemption in excess of the value of property.
Good.
This is, I just because we were talking inflators, this is relevant on the top of page 95. There is an inflator built in here, which uses that NEPA or NIPA, however it's pronounced, inflator. But what to note here is this references each dollar amount. And currently, because you don't have a cap included, right? The dollar amounts that are referenced above are income amounts. And so if you bring in a cap and you start talking about that residential, then you may need to distinguish. There's also an open question as to whether or not that's the appropriate indicator for the income to reference as well. The remainder of the pieces here are really conforming type changes. So I might leave you with that, which is the whole of the, we have specific pieces related to how to allocate. We try to ensure that some technical measures for allocating the exemption for folks who are co-op members, or if you're surrounded by nonprofit trust, a land trust, for instance. The ways that we currently allocate the property tax credit, we make the same mechanical provisions here to ensure that you're receiving a similar kind of value for your exemption.
Can I ask a question? The back on page 95, the adjusted for inflation language,
Yes.
is this adjusting the municipal tax credit?
This
or?
This would be subdivision 1 exclusively, which I think is not the municipal. But yeah, the municipal is in subdivision 2.
Okay, so this is adjusting the
The income
income levels on the exemption, like
Exactly.
the new exemption.
That's exactly right. Yep. And so if you brought in a new construct into that subdivision 1, your homestead exemption, like a house site value, a cap, you have a new dollar amount to which this inflator is.
Okay.
You'd want to be careful. I just had to change the language to accommodate that.
Okay.
I'm going to pause the screen and just flip and see if there's anything else that seems particularly relevant, but I know you have a lot to get through. And we have walked through this stuff before this is not due. So
Rob, question for John.
Yeah.
So I just want to know if this came up in your travels since you followed along with this bill. I raised it in the other day, and it is still a concern I have for my constituency, and I have to advocate for them. That I see the sparsity adjustment, and I know this can go back 4 or 5 years. So looking across the table, they might reflect on this. That we're adjusting for how it costs more to teach kids in very rural areas. What I don't see in the current state, as well as this contemplated future state, an adjustment for how incomes vary or costs of labor vary across the state. So Chittenden County, you can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and what the average median incomes are for Chittenden County versus like Essex County. There's like a 40% swing there. Has it come up at all and how much it costs to educate kids in different communities that have, that maybe they're more urban, but they have higher median incomes due to the factors of that geography?
So I think the extent, I don't think I can be especially responsive, but the thing that springs to mind is just that the economic disadvantage type weight does have a built-in accounting for differences in income levels across the state, right? Because it uses area median income. I don't know honestly how that plays out because it may be that the geographic buckets in Vermont are so broad that area median income is not as differentiated as maybe you would hope it would be. And it also ties to the highest area median income. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm thinking of stuff I was working on stuff this morning. For this, take back everything I just said. Everything I just said.
He may be doing the same thing.
So I don't have something responsive, and I'm sorry that I just went down a chip path with you.
I just remember this, the Champlain Valley School District, when you look at these numbers, they are going to get hurt in a variety of different configurations. And when I talk to the school board members, they say, hey, it costs more to recruit teachers to do the same job in CDU than it does.
Okay.
Elsewhere.
So that's an issue. Labor costs vary, big issue. And the goal, but I've heard no numbers or anything else from the administration, is to levelize, meaning bringing some of those others up. But that number is not figured in here. So I will bring that up tomorrow morning when we meet with the administration, because I've got two big outstandings. One is, well, the kick CTE down the road. I think there's some money in here, but it's pretty vague. They just kind of say
Just what we've always done.
Yeah. for now. And we have transportation, which has been being figured by the administration is double what we're spending now, because they're going to pay 100% rather than 50%. But I don't think any of us think that if we're going to larger districts at some point, even if we don't, that transportation is likely to go up in state, but state's going to pay for it, except it is going to be paid for by the local property tax. And now we have this one. Yeah, how are we gonna?
I'm just on the property tax credit. I really think we should see the presentation we had earlier in the session that talked about the current property tax credit system, where 60% of the people that are in it don't even are hurt by it. And by expanding it even bigger, that's going to get worse. It's going to drive the homestead rate up. The homestead, I think this is a $45 million expansion. That gets paid for by the homestead property tax rate. I mean, you can end up in a situation where your homestead property tax rate is actually greater than your non-homestead rate.
Oh, that's
I mean,
happened.
We need to think about shrinking the property tax credit program down to the people that it's actually helping right now, not expand it to a bigger group. It's just going to get hurt anyhow.
This is not a credit, this is an exemption, so
I know.
it's a different animal.
It's the same dynamic though.
Yeah,
I-
whatever we exempt in value is money we don't collect. So that money has to be paid as long as we're spending it. That money gets collected in the general state property tax rate.
I like the outside value exemption as a mechanism. But when you apply it to this big of a group of people, you're going to put a bunch of people in it that are actually gonna get hurt by being in it.
Julia,
We did that, I mean,
can you model that under this system? Well, we did, you have models, right?
Yeah.
Well, we've seen who will pay more and who will pay less, but does that take in?
For the homestead exemption?
Yeah,
Yeah, so there are some slides that I do have for the committee today, if that would be helpful, that shows who would pay more and who would pay less under this construct.
does that figure in the statewide property tax having to go up to 40?
No, so
5
that's the
million.
challenge, and that's one of the caveats included in the slides to Senator Beck's point, the increased cost of the expansion. Dependent on how that cost is borne, will depend on how property taxes are impacted, right? H 454 is currently structured as a uniform property tax rate, so it's uniform across all 4 classes unless different factors are set. The modeling does not assume the additional 45 million would be. It's too iterative, right? It costs 45 million, and then I recalculated the rates and put that in, and then that changes the cost of the exemption, and then and then you need to recalculate rates to do the cost of the exemption. So it's this iterative process. So we just need to name the fact that there's 45 million that's not being borne by the rates in the modeling, but if property tax rates were to bear that, then they would increase.
It's a hamster wheel.
Yes,
And we have the general rule of thumb for the FY 26 grand list, that 14 million roundabout is a penny on the property tax of the taxable grand list. That's homestead action, 100%.
and we buy down the tax rates for 2 years, so people have been being sheltered from the actual costs. And I think since we've gone into all of this, and anything that talks about bigger school districts is extremely threatening and somewhat unpopular. If we hit a significant number of people with a big upward adjustment, A, I don't think this bill will make it out. And B, even if it does, it'll probably be dead. We've talked a lot about trying to shelter people from sticker shock and facing things in the hole. And that's part of what we were seeing yesterday. The House said, okay, this is what it's going to cost on the present cost model to do all the things we said we wanted to do. And that's what we've got. It was a bigger number than we're spending now. The Senate did the opposite. They said, this is what we're spending now. And we know the governor has said he wants us to spend less. So they backed into the numbers. If this is the answer we want, what numbers do we need to get there? And that's what we have with them. Our challenge is to choose one or the other or develop our own. I think we're developing our own. The House had 3 months. They had almost 3 weeks in Senate Ed, and we have, I
7 days.
believe, 4 days left. Which means that we're going to take a break, not a break. We're going to do the OPR bill. And then we will come back to this discussion. But the thing I'm going to need to know when we come back is people's availability to come in Monday, including staff. If they're available to come in Monday.
what time on Monday would you like?
I'm thinking afternoon. I would love to get out in my garden sometime, but I don't think I'm gonna get there.
Can we zoom? What are the rules around that?
I think the chair can decide if you can vote, I think.
Yeah.
Zoom is not my preference. To have 5 people up on Zoom is not the best.
I can come on Monday whenever you need me, Madam Chair.
I have a funeral on Monday, but I can
Okay.
come maybe after.
I would. I'd be done by, I'd have to leave here at 5:30.
Okay. We can work, if we did something like 2 to 5 or 2 to 5:30. Think about it. What time is your funeral? You've got a driveway.
Do I have to wear dress clothes? or
No,
can I
you do
come
not
in-
have to wear dress
Okay.
clothes.
Too much dressing.
Senator McDonald would have shown up in his bride clothes.
Okay. So I might need-
We are not officially in session and the chair has used her authority to say, you can come in your driveway clothes.
Excellent.
Okay. So I'm gonna schedule us as 2 work, 2 to 5.
That could be that time.
Probably not. One can do 1 to 5.
Who among staff do you, I assume you need me,
I need fun and I probably need Julia.
do you need, I'm assuming you don't
I
need
said staff committee. Okay,
that, you don't need that, right?
I don't need,
You don't need Beth, right? This is just gonna be
No,
touching.
no, I think this is really, we need to,
Are we touching Kirby's sections?
no. Those we'll do at midnight because I don't think we can get into that much trouble with reappraisals and studies on tax sales. At least they don't tend to swim at 2 in the morning before my eyes as much as numbers do. So,
One to
I'm
five.
trying to avoid midnight.
You're saying 1 to 5? Is that
Let's
what you
do
said?
1 to 5.
Right.
Okay.
I'm gonna leave.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Are we taking a break or are we going right? to-
We are going right to OPR. Take a break if you need to.
Oh, no. Board meeting.
I don't even want to work that. It's got all.
President, right?
We have a time. Okay,
Used to be hands.
Tim has to leave.
Yes.
Have a time constraint. What is it?
I have a hard stop at 4, however, the latter part of the bill will be addressed by my colleague, Terry McLean, and, if there's any questions about the first part of the bill, I can do OPR, my other colleague.
Okay,
Attorney
so
McLean.
it sounds like it's gonna work and none of us are thinking about OPR bills. So give us a minute. Is is what you have on our website.
Yes, it should be, draft 2.1, which is a strike all amendment coming from the Senate, Government Operations Committee, and should be dated the
Yeah.
29th last month. Yes,
Where is it? Where's it been?
but you can see
Here, okay, good. So let's walk through it.
that. I think it was voted on the committee last, maybe Thursday.
Yeah, I think we just got it. All right.
So for the record, Tim Devil, Legislative Council, thank you very much for having me, committee members. For you, you have a 27-page miscellaneous bill pertaining to the Office of Professional Regulation, or the OPR miscellaneous books. Shorthand, you may have heard of this. It's a annual bill, and it is, let's see, I can generally describe it as the first part of the bill having to do with raising revenue through various fees and some minor, I shouldn't say minor, but some other more substantive regulatory for in the context of professions changes, which perhaps this committee wouldn't be as interested in. And then the second half of the bill has to do with the addition of what was S-119 and having to do with the creation of regulations for
early childhood educator, and as I just said, we'll do that tomorrow.
And that one may be a little more controversial. And in background, we used to do a regular fee bill, and OPR came through every couple of years and adjusted. The license fees are set to cover the cost of regulating the licensee. And they've gone more to generalize, but we have also done a series of interstate. You can get a interstate license, which allows you to go in all the I'm thinking compacts, and that's not the word we use because compacts we do with insurance. But it basically allows you to get one license, it's cheaper than your state license, and you can be a nurse and or whatever. I think we've done nurses, social workers, psychologists. You can work in any one of those states on this license. The result has been that there are, I believe, significantly less money coming into OPR to regulate the professions because we've allowed that money to go out. But when the people on those licenses are in this state, OPR is responsible for at least monitoring them. Then anything that goes wrong gets sent back, I believe, to the licensing state. But they haven't lost a whole lot of responsibility, but they have lost money. And I may be, that is my understanding of the dynamic. Because I can remember reporting the last bill that we did to an interstate compact and saying this will legit, it's only 5,000 or 15,000. But eventually we will have to pay that piper. That was probably 2 years ago. So that's my base when I'm coming to this. And you can tell me if I'm completely off the wall, but.
Nope, I don't find it necessary to correct anything you said, Madam Chair. And in fact, if there are any questions about the finances or fiscal health of OPR, I would probably recommend that you call those folks in the.
We will definitely have joint fiscal and OPR and talk to us. All right.
And if it's fine with you, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to just kind of skip to the most impacted, most relevant portions of the bill for this major jurisdiction. That's fine. So if we start by, let's see, on page 1, we'll start in the portion of the bill having to do with OPR and public management. In section 1, we have modifications to 3 VSA 118, that is the collection and disposition of revenue. And the first material change we see is actually on page 2 towards the top. And this is with the addition of, and I'm sorry, is there an expectation that I should share this or people follow up?
Because then anybody that's watching at home can see it if you share it on the screen.
And
anyone else in the room that is trying to read it on their phone. I appreciate larger print.
And I apologize, I'm just going to take a moment to join
That's okay.
the meeting here and then share.
I like your pen.
Thank you. So,
Just a person raising their hand.
We got you.
Sir Winston Churchill. It's
Oh,
the
nice.
80th anniversary of Justice for Peace.
Oh, pins, they're the best.
What?
Tim has little
Winston Churchill.
pins that he coordinates with special days.
Oh,
That's Winston Churchill.
that's Winston Churchill. What?
It's an approximation. of Winston Churchill.
All right.
So, here we are. Thank you for bearing with me.
It's okay.
So moving through to page 2 here, we see an additional subsection C added having to do with collecting and depositing certain revenues generated through, this is the most important part of the story here, one-time or periodic sales data by subscription or other contractual basis. And this has to do with OPR, managing lots of professional, licensure data. And, apparently they have to date been sharing that for free. And I believe they want to explore opportunities where they could charge for some data, where they'd be sharing. Well, I can, again, let them probably get into the policy basis, but this all just speaks to the person right here. The next section 2, we kind of move into one of 2 different categories in here where we just have an increased flat fees. And this is in Title 3, so this is just their overall general statutory location versus Title 26, which is more specific by chapter as each profession be regulated. And this will modify 3 VSA of 125 type of fees. First, we have an increase of the general verification of license from $20 to $30. Then we get into biennial renewal, which is not being changed from the
But who are we? What is the biennial renewal? We're not changing.
this will apply to because it's in Title 3, all professionals being regulated by the
Okay, so it's for all professionals.
And so there is a default, 275 by annual renewal fee, and then there's some exceptions to that, which we have W here, which would be for electronics shops, and that is for $200.
Okay.
And that's a new fee, I should say, versus.
What's the verification of license for? Because can't you just go look up if somebody has a license, if it's correct?
The verification of licensure.
Yeah. I went back up the page.
Let's see.
Yeah, they're
Okay, sorry. So additional piece of law, there's a piece. Verification of license. I apologize. I'm not exactly sure how they what they really mean by this fee in particular. But
Chris.
Christopher from Fiscal, Senator Amato is correct that you can go online and look up this information. My understanding is this fee is paid when somebody's seeking licensure in another state typically, and you need like an official document, piece of paper from Vermont. Yeah.
So yeah, another state can ask OPR to verify that you're licensed in Vermont, and it's kind of like sending your proof that you have a college degree, bachelor's from your institution or something like that. So it's the official, like this person's really licensed as an electrician or, well, not electrician, because they don't do that, but not through OPR. I don't think.
And we will have OPR in to tell us why they think they need all of this.
good.
Increases. It will not be the first time that this committee has changed them. Okay.
so moving on to other new fees, we have one for apprenticeship application, $50, and then specialty or endorsement of existing license application, that's $100. And then a new disciplinary action surcharge of $250. We'll get into what that is a little bit later on, though.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see. And then we move on to another section of flat fee rates, and this has to do with for peer support providers. And this actually in the same statutory section, but is in terms of the bill section because they picked their effective dates. And so we'll see here a increase from $50 to $75 in for peer support providers or peer recovery support specialists. And we have some modifications to OPR duties and disciplinary authority. And this is where we get into unauthorized practice has an increased civil penalty of note. That is if the attorney general or an attorney assigned by the OPR does bring an action with more practice, that penalty can be now not more than $5,000. So it's essentially from 2,500. And then again, for practicing and permitting the practice of regular profession, the authority. The. Then. And so this is the section having to do with the more substantive fact, change of the disciplinary fee that was referenced above. Section 6, modifying previous say 129, that is powers of boards or of director and advisor professions disciplinary process. We have here, after a finding of unprofessional conduct, the respondent shall pay a disciplinary act surcharge pursuant to that section above. And again, see that is $250, I believe. There we are. Top of page 3.
So we're gonna do schools of cosmetology or barbering. I'm waiting for OPR, but I've had a complaint that the only thing that a cosmetology woman that cut my hair can't do, that a barber can do, is use a straight razor. And with new haircuts, straight razors are used, they all. But the only way they can get the ability to use a straight razor is to go back through barbering school. She would like that fixed. So since we have this, I will talk to OPR when they come. Yes, I do think anyone using a straight razor on anyone else's body should
Be trained.
be trained. But I'm not sure they should have to go through barbering school when they've already got a cosmetology.
Barbering schools of very long school.
Yeah, that was the complaint, that you can't work and just get this enhanced
Yeah.
Right.
ability.
Straight razor.
I finally have a place to ask.
Special license.
Straight razor license. No, it's just a, certificate.
All right,
Well, they do have the ones that go like.
okay, let's keep going.
And I should say the next two bill sections, not particularly relevant to revenues. See, we have appropriations, section 12, regarding a new position to be added. They are contemplating, let's see. Yes, a new executive officer for the regulation of mental health professions. So a large subset of those professions they do regulate would be essentially managed by this new executive officer.
Let me just add, if you wouldn't mind, this morning, we learned in Health and Welfare that they're taking on a big bucket of work around mental health professionals. And it is, I think it will require some extra staffing.
Did it make the budget? Do you know?
I don't know.
They're trying to get more cohesion. I think in the mental health group is pretty broad, and the kinds of trainings and the fees they've all been done individually. But I don't think they're planning to have it done like for a year or two.
Yeah.
It's not gonna come to us in the next few weeks. They're just starting it, and it was allowing doctoral level psychologists to prescribe mental health drugs was the context this morning. Of the discussion.
Did they take? They had no back.
Dr. Senator Douglas.
And so I would say this is part of the bill where I would turn it over to my colleague, Attorney McGlynn, to discuss early childhood educators. Before that, I just want to ask if there's any additional questions about the bill up to this point.
Okay, that was repealing motor vehicle racing.
The regulation of it.
Ah.
Wow, that's good. Every time I see it.
Prepaid funeral expenses, all right,
Yeah,
we'll
keep an eye.
most certainly have OPR here, but I'm afraid it is not going to be until the week of the 18th or 19th.
That we what? That have an OPR?
Well, we've got to get the education bill out next week. I think it'll be the week after before we get back to this. All right.
You're gonna forget.
Yeah,
'Cause you can always listen to the recording.
I know, that's the good thing about YouTube, it's great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go back over it. We're going to hear an awful lot more about the licensure of early childhood educators. I don't know about anybody else, but this is the one section that I've been getting emails on.
Alright, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Have fun, Katie. Good luck, Katie.
I don't know if I want to be sitting here with that even. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Katie McLean, Office of Legislative Counsel. Let me pull up the document for you.
That's.
Wait. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
So before I start, maybe I should ask, are you wanting to look through all of the sections and all of the words? Do you want a summary of it and then just bring you down to the?
2,000-foot
Okay,
walk through and then the money.
okay. So just to sort of lay the framework, as you've already heard from your emails, it sounds like this is a proposal to regulate early childhood educators who are working in a program that is regulated by the Child Development Division. Creates a new chapter within Title 26. Under the title Early Childhood Educator, there are 4 categories. ECE 1, 2, and 3. That vary in terms of the educational requirements, and also a family child care provider that's a legacy track. And those are all considered early childhood educators under this. The fee structure differs based on the particular category the provider falls into. So our first section just lists early childhood educators as another type of profession that OPR regulates. And then we get into the creation of this new chapter. The chapter is created in section 15, and then it's amended in section 16 on different dates. So the reason that the chapter is being created sooner than the rest of the chapter takes effect is because there is a board of early childhood educators that would take effect initially to help develop the rules to govern the profession. So that language would take effect July 1, 2025. And then the early childhood educator licensure provisions wouldn't take effect until later. So I'm gonna skip over the board language. This sort of details who would be on the board, what are the board responsibilities and procedures. I'll skip over that and then I'll move to the rest of the chapter. So we have a definition section that lays out the terms in this chapter. Scope of practice, we'll slow down here. Early childhood educator licensed pursuant to this chapter shall provide care and educational instruction to children from birth through 8 years of age, a variety of programs regulated by CDD, including planning and implementing intentional developmentally appropriate learning experiences that promote social, emotional, physical, language, and cognitive development and health of each child served, establishing and maintaining safe, caring, inclusive, and healthy learning environment, observing, documenting, and assessing children's learning development, developing reciprocal culturally responsive relationships with families and communities, engaging in reflective practice and continuous learning. And then we'll see language that is similar to this over and over again. But an early childhood educator that's licensed pursuant to this chapter does not include teachers who are licensed under AOE with an early childhood endorsement, early childhood special education endorsement, or elementary education endorsement. So those individuals are separate and apart from the regulation structure that's being set up here. And subsection B, an early childhood educator that's licensed pursuant to this chapter shall have the following responsibilities depending on license type.
And then we have the 4 categories. Is it helpful to go through all of those, or is that too?
I think so. So
You
the
think so? Okay.
person that is caring for an infant in a childcare facility, which is basically feeding, changing, rocking, putting down to sleep. That is an early childhood educator 1.
Well, it depends how much education that person has, how much training that person has. That somebody who is an ECE 3 could also be doing those tasks. They would be licensed differently, and they would also have a different scope of type of activities they can do within the childcare facility.
And I think another, I was gonna say weird element of all this is that they're overseen by DCF and not AOE, correct?
These early childhood educators, the programs themselves are regulated by CDD, but obviously that by having a license following the individual and not just the program would be under OPR.
Yep.
Okay, so ECE 1 authorized to be an early childhood education team in a family childcare home or center-based childcare and preschool program for children birth through 8 years of age. ECE 1 shall serve under the supervision of an ECE 2 or 3 or a teacher who is exempt from the licensure under this chapter. ECE 2, in addition to the responsibilities and authorities of the ECE 1, shall be authorized to be a lead educator in a family childcare home or center-based childcare and preschool program as defined by DCF enrolled for birth through 8 years of age, providing supervision to individuals licensed as an ECE 1 and receiving guidance from individuals who are licensed as an ECE 3. ECE 3, in addition to the responsibilities and authorities of ECE 1 and 2, shall be authorized to be a lead educator in a family childcare home or center-based childcare and preschool program, providing supervision to individuals licensed as an ECE 1 and guidance to individuals as an ECE 2. Then our 4th category is the family childcare provider, shall be authorized to be a lead educator in a family childcare home for children birth through 8 years of age. Sort of previewing what's to come, but the reason this 4th category family childcare provider was added is it is sort of envisioned to be a legacy track. So individuals who are family childcare providers now would have a 6-month window when the language took effect to have this particular to be able to apply for this particular category of early childhood educator license. And they could continue to practice under that particular license type without having to attain some of the other requirements for the ECE 1, 2, or 3. However, if that person who's licensed as a family childcare provider stepped away from providing childcare for 2 or more years, they couldn't come back as a family childcare provider. So that wouldn't be an ongoing category. It would just be a temporary kind of grandfathering with people who are currently or yes, whatever term you'd like to use.
I like legacy category.
Legacy
Did you come up
category.
with that? It's a good idea.
Oh, I take credit.
Sounded like.
So anyway, so that's a time limited window for folks who are already in the field. And then we have language that an early childhood educator licensed pursuant to this chapter may serve in a supporting role only and not as a lead educator in the provision of pre-K services under what we call universal pre-K. So right now, the statute in Title 16 says that it has to be an AOE licensed teacher who is supervising those pre-K hours, and that wouldn't change with this. And then we have prohibitions. I'll keep moving. Exemptions, some of the same exemptions we already talked about. This doesn't apply to a teacher licensed at AOE with those endorsements. This also doesn't apply to an individual who's providing after-school childcare in a program regulated by CDD or any other program that's exempt from CDD regulation. So if you are a parent and you are taking
children from another family to watch them during the day. Because it's two families that you are supervising, that you're providing care for, that doesn't, there's no CDD regulation of that because it's, not enough families. It's too
But
small.
we have
Yeah.
decided that the system that many of us depended on, which was someone providing child care in their home, and they might have 3, 4, 5, 6 toddlers there. We've decided that that is a legacy, and we are not going to have that system once these people die off.
So if it's, that many children in the home, they would be regulated by CDD. And therefore they would need a license under this chapter to continue serving children. And they could come in under the family child care provider category.
But if I have the resources to hire a nanny, does the nanny have to have any of these qualifications?
Not under this draft because they're not a program regulated by CDD.
How about the neighborhood babysitter?
Also not regulated by CDD.
I don't know if there are any of those anymore, but there used to be. Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna skip ahead. We have the qualifications of who, what the qualifications are for this particular type of licensure. Is that something you'd like me to go through?
Probably, because we're gonna be asked to set.
Okay.
Great.
So to qualify for licensure as an early childhood educator in a program regulated by CDD, an applicant shall have attained the age of majority and shall have a high school diploma or successful completion of GED or equivalent credential. The applicant shall have additional education and experience by license type. So first, EC1 shall have completed an approved certificate or credential program in early childhood education requiring a minimum of 120 hours in field experience. ECE2 shall have completed an approved associate's degree program in early childhood education or related field. It requires a minimum of 60 college credits and field experience and offering college credit based upon assessment of the individual's competencies acquired through experience working in the profession. Or the person could have a field unrelated to early childhood education. As long as they have a minimum of 21 approved college credits in the core early childhood education competency areas that would be identified in rule. EC3 completed an approved bachelor's program, early childhood education and early childhood education or related field requiring a minimum of 120 college credits and field experience. Or similarly to the EC2, an unrelated field, they have a minimum of 21 approved college credits and the core early childhood education competency areas that would be defined in rule. And then the family child care provider is required to currently operate a family child care home that's regulated and in good standing with CDD as of January 1, 2028. And the board shall not accept the family child care provider application after January 1, 2028. So if this takes effect July 1, 2027, that's the 6-month window to apply for this license type.
Be a family child care provider, which is the person that is presently providing child care in their home. That someone told me that person was not going to have to get the college credits.
They don't. They have to have reach the age of majority. They have to have a high school diploma or a GED, and they have to be currently operating a family child care home that's in good standing.
So after, what would it be, January 1, 2028, can you still create a new family child care home? You would just have to be,
And EC 1, 2, or 3.
you can be a 1 and have a, or do you have to be a
This question
3?
came up. I think you have to be a 2 or 3.
A 2 or 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
it doesn't get rid of family
No,
child care,
no. But this is,
Well, you can't, you'd have to,
but you have to take a course.
You'd have to-
Or
well-
courses.
an associate's degree, which is generally 2 years of higher education.
Okay.
50% of our high school graduates don't go on to anything.
So license renewal, this might be specific to this committee's interest. Licenses are to be renewed every 2 years upon application and payment of the required fee. Failure to comply with the provisions of this section results in suspension of all privileges granted under the license. A license that has lapsed shall be reinstated upon payment of a biennial renewal fee and the late renewal penalty that's already in statute, except a family child care provider license shall not be renewed after a lapse of 2 or more years. So we've already talked about that. The board can adopt rules necessary for the protection of the public to assure the board that an applicant whose license has lapsed for more than 5 years is professionally qualified for reinstatement. I'm gonna skip over this. In addition to the provisions in A, an applicant for renewal shall have satisfactorily completed continuing education requirements as required by the board. For the purposes of the subsection, the board may require by rule not more than 24 hours of approved continuing education as a condition of renewal. And then we get to the fees. So we have fees for each of the 4 categories. For early childhood educator 1, the application for the initial license is $125, biennial renewal $225. ECE 2, $175 for the initial license, $250 for biennial renewal. ECE 3, $225 for initial license, $275 for biennial renewal. Family child care provider, $175 for initial license and $250 for biennial renewal. There is language at the end of the bill that the first 2 cycles of the initial licensure and biennial renewal would be covered for individuals who are going to be regulated under this chapter. So I'll apply that for you to get there. We have language about unprofessional conduct. I might move over that.
Sort of real quick one. Why do we have an initial license fee that's lower than the renewal when it takes more to do a application? Like, okay.
That's a question for me.
The answer I've gotten in the past, I've asked that same question, the OPR has responded that it's trying to help people get into the field with a lower fee. And then when they are already established as whatever they are in their profession, the theory or the thought is that they should be able to afford a higher fee because they've established themselves in the profession. That's the basic answer that you can certainly ask.
We do this, I'm going to see if I can't find the annual salaries of these people. When we were looking at the original child care bill, I remember being told the average child care worker's wages were $27,000 a year. So I want to make sure, because these fees are in line with the return on investment they can hope to make.
Yeah, they do seem high. I was gonna
Yeah.
ask how do they compare to other professions, but that's not really a key
We
question.
don't know if it's the labor department or who can find out what that, maybe the childcare people can help us know what are we looking at for earning potential, because it costs money to go to college, it costs money to get an associate's degree. You can get some scholarships. I don't know if the BSAC 2-year scholarship or 2 years, for a while you could go to 2 years of community college with no tuition, but there's books, there's
The childcare bill did have education coming in. Looking at.
Yeah,
I will check on that. There's money in the budget, that's to cover the cost of infant and toddler care. That's to fix another problem we caused, because when we let the schools do pre-K, some of the schools took a lot of the 3 and 4-year-olds out of the childcare system because they were public schools and they were free or much cheaper. But you have to have more personnel to take care of infants and toddlers, and many centers had been offsetting that cost with the cost of the 3 and 4-year-olds. So suddenly there's a problem at the bottom. And we'd hope CCFAP helps some of that, but apparently there's still a problem getting young child, infant and toddler.
Thank you.
So we'll learn more. And we'll hear from, I know, just Let's Grow Kids wanted to talk to Sarah or
Things like.
you want to talk, okay. We'll get everybody in, but it might not be for a while. As we have this other little bill, so let's walk through this.
Okay, I'm gonna skip over the section on unprofessional conduct for the time being. And I'm gonna just summarize what this variance language says. For ECs 2 and 3, there's an option to have a transitional license if somebody doesn't have the educational requirements right away. And this variance or transitional license could go on for up to 8 years if the person is making progress towards the educational requirements. So that is what's happening in that section. Disclosures by licensees. This is language that an early childhood educator has to post in the program, various information and provide it to prospective families and current families in the program, describing who regulates them, who regulates the program. If there's a pre-K teacher who's coming in that's licensed by AOE, who's regulating that person. So it's a disclosure to families so they understand the different regulatory structures in play. The transitional license is repealed in 2035 because it was only an option for 8 years. So at that point, that section would be removed. And then we get into language about appropriations and positions. So there is an A and B in this section. A pertains to fiscal year 26, B pertains to fiscal year 27. Under A, fiscal year 26, 2 positions are authorized: a classified executive officer of the Vermont Board of Early Childhood Educators and an exempt staff attorney. The appropriation in fiscal year 26 is $262,000. And then in fiscal year 27, 3 positions: classified licensing staff, classified enforcement staff, classified admin staff. The amount $628,867. And then we have this subsection C that I've already hinted about, which is that in fiscal year 27, 1.4 million is distributed from funds that are designated for CCFAP to OPR, and that would cover the first licensure of individuals who would be regulated under this and their first renewal. So that would be 4 years of licenses would be covered by that 1.4 million. And that's it. Thank you.
Is the money budgeted in the budget?
Yes.
In the budget?
Do I remember that explanation? There was, remember they were using, there's more money coming in from the payroll tax than is needed to support the program. The governor was using that to cover the commitment from the general fund to the CCFAP program. The Senate didn't do it that way, but they set up this fund with the additional dollars that were, or some of the additional dollars that were sitting there, but I think I've got that right. I'm waiting to see someone scream. But it is covered in there.
And there's also an appropriation for FY 27 in here. How are we doing?
Yeah, I don't know.
And positions for FY 27. That was my question.
I was told it had been worked out. I don't know what that means.
Yes.
There's 3 positions that worked out, Chris,
I
what,
think I can address that well. As chair,
Okay.
probably.
that's weird.
I'm gonna ask Tucker, do you have a section of this bill that?
Probably the last paragraph.
I was Tim's backup,
You
in
did
case there
stack
were
up,
questions
okay.
after Tim left. You did ask 3 questions that I could offer help
That
with.
would be helpful.
So in reverse order, I think
Okay,
it was also potentially important. The fees that you just walked through are all at or below the standard biennial renewal license fee in Title III.
okay,
For the appropriation or budget tie-in for the executive director of the regulation of mental health professionals, that's actually in this bill. And there's $175,000 appropriated in the subsection directly under where that executive director is established. And barbers are allowed to use a razor blade around the face and the neck.
yes,
But cosmetologists are also allowed to use razor blades, just not here.
okay.
Why not?
There you go. I think I got all the questions.
A cosmetologist now also functions as barber. Cosmetologist cuts my husband's hair at the barber shop.
But you can't give them a shave. You can't give them a clean shave.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So Tucker is back up, Chris. And then we've got Jada is on, on Zoom. So Chris, walk us through the numbers and then we will hear from Jada about the massage therapist fees.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Roop from the Joint Fiscal Office. I will preface my testimony with the disclaimer that I am not our resident OPR expert. My colleague, or childcare for that matter, my colleague Ted Barnett took a stab on the OPR bill and I picked up because he's unavailable right now. So everything I've learned about this, I've learned in about the last 3 days, 4 days. But I'll do my best and get back to you if you really flummox me with a question I can't answer.
Okay.
But I'm going to start with the first piece because really this is 2 bills in one. I'm talking about just the OPR, the miscellaneous OPR bill that the OPR had proposed. This was the section that Tim had walked through earlier. The fiscal impacts here are, there is 1 new position that would be authorized, this executive officer for the regulation of mental health professions that would be funded with a $170,000 general fund appropriation. The position and that appropriation are in this bill. They are not in the big bill. However, the budget construct accommodates this expense. So, most of the appropriations end up in the budget bill, but
Yeah,
there's a few that end up in other freestanding bills and we have to account for those. This is accounted for.
okay,
The fee changes that they had proposed, we expect will have a positive revenue impact to the professional regulation fund of, the neighborhood of about $220,000 annually. I am now going to pivot to the early childhood educator licensure piece, the second piece that Katie just walked through. The bill would appropriate, and there's a couple moving pieces here. So first I'm going to talk about what's in the bill. The bill would appropriate, $433,000 from the general fund in FY26 and $629,000 in FY27 and create some positions. So the thinking here would be in FY26, there would be some startup costs and the first 2 positions would come on board. And then in FY27, there would be 3 more positions created. And then the let's call it $630,000. That would be the cost in FY27 for all 5 of those positions. And that would generally represent like the annualized cost moving forward of those 5 positions. After FY27, to sustain the program, it would shift off the general fund and onto the professional regulation fund once the fee revenue is coming in. I will mention Senator Hardy had pointed out the construct about appropriating money in a future year that is unusual. I think your colleagues across the hall would have some thoughts on how to deal with this. We don't typically appropriate funds, for 2 years out, but, having this language in the bill, I think is informative for you all to sort of understand the magnitude of costs that are expected in future years. But as a general matter of practice, we don't typically appropriate funds like that. We do it year to year. I think Katie had also mentioned the section about distributing the 1.4 million in FY 27 to OPR to cover those first licensure renewal fees until things get up and running. Again, I think that's sort of the seed money, if you will, to get things off the ground. And then once the fees are in place, according to OPR, they did some sort of conservative ballparking on the size of the universe that they expect and of folks who would be licensed in the various categories. And their estimate is that initially it would be, just over $1 million a year, and then around 1.35 or so once the higher renewals start kicking in. It's important to keep in mind that the revenue would primarily occur biannually since these are 2-year licenses. So, if the annualized cost is about $630,000 a year, and you're bringing in that magnitude of money every other year, it essentially all sugars off and pays for itself. I went into a whole lot of details here that you probably don't want to be bored with at 4:20 on a Thursday afternoon.
We don't regulate childcare, but we're going back to education funding, so.
Yeah, and my understanding is one of those, I think it was the electrology fee, that was inadvertently deleted from a piece of legislation a few years ago, and OPR had requested that it be added back in. So it's not sort of a new fee.
It's not a new
I think they
fee.
found out that it
It's a
dropped off.
slippage.
Yeah. So I'm just jumping right back to early childhood educators. There is a licensure board that would be created. There'd be some, relatively nominal per diem expenses based on how frequently they meet. There's a little pretty chart about the application fees and biennial renewal fees and the estimated universe of licensees that OPR gave to me. So this adds up to, just over 5,000. That's sort of on the low end of the range that they anticipate between 5,000 and 7,000 total licensees really in this profession. I want to pivot to sort of the difference between the money and the bill and the budget. In testimony that I found and linked to, the Secretary of State's office indicated that there'd be some resource needs, obviously, to implement the early childhood educator licensure. Those 2 positions in FY 26, those first 2, at a cost of about $262,000, and then 3 positions in FY 27. To bring you to the full complement of 5. There would be one-time startup costs in FY 26 of about $45,000, and then that need for the 2 cycles of licensure reimbursement. And then once things are sort of steady state and operating, the program would be funded through the licensure fee revenue. I am now going to skip down to the budget conversation. I think I just repeated myself here in terms of, all right, this is what's actually in the bill in terms of what's appropriated. The 262,000 for those positions in 26, and that 628,000 in FY 27. I do want to pivot though to what's actually in the budget, and that's this bottom piece here. This is the Senate budget. The Senate budget included appropriations of $1.269 million to support this initiative. There's $306,000 from the general fund for staff and those one-time IT costs, IT startup costs. So those are those first 2 positions and the IT cost. And then the Senate budget appropriated just under $1 million from the general fund for fee waivers relating to implementation. There are no appropriations in the House budget to support this. So the Senate budget included some money, the House budget does not. And I'm sure once the bill leaves this room and goes across the hall, they will then reconcile what's in this bill with what's ultimately in the budget.
Been spoken to by the chair. House appropriations.
What did you say?
It isn't in their budget.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so who made? Is it GovOps that made the decision to approve this licensing scheme?
That's my understanding.
It did
On last Thursday, I believe it was last,
Didn't go through health and welfare.
No, last Thursday, I believe, Senate GovOps voted to add this bill, that licensure bill into this.
I knew they were talking about that. Okay.
And the lead sponsors are in GovOps.
Okay. Questions for Chris? Thank you.
thank you.
And I know Jada Thompson, right? Yeah. Came to us today, said she'd like to talk, and then, are you ready? Would you like to talk today? Or wait until we take it up again? You looking hesitant?
What's your schedule like? I guess I mean, if we do it, I'd like to do it so that we can really be comprehensive, so.
Okay, then I will wait, until we're finished. Yeah, we're not gonna take this up again for a while, because I've got to get the education bill out. So we'll wait. I think this will probably be the only thing we discuss in the bill. So Jada, thank you for joining us. This is the Senate Finance Committee. We just asked that you identify yourself for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Jada Thompson, and I'm the Program Manager for AMTA Government Relations, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Vermont chapter of AMTA. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to testify on H472 regarding the Office of Professions and Regulation Fees for Massage Therapists. As some of you may remember, a few years ago, the legislature passed a regulatory bill for massage therapists and body workers. We strongly advocated for licensure, which was included in the bill that Senator Hardy originally introduced. Unfortunately, as the bill made its way through the legislative processes, at the request of OPR, the level of regulation changed to registration. Instead of licensure, there was no educational requirements or background checks, just registry. The initial fee of $90 in the bill was typically manageable and reasonable given the level of regulation, but the biannual renewal fee has made it a significant leap to $275. Despite massage therapy not being regulated or licensed in Vermont, the high annual fees for registration has placed a significant financial strain on professionals in the massage therapy field. This fee of $275 is the same, and in some instances, even more than other professions that are already fully licensed. Social workers are paying $180, radiologic therapists and technicians are paying $175, cosmetologists are paying $155, and private investigators or security services of unarmed registrants are only paying $95. We've heard a plethora of complaints about the fees, and the records are showing that approximately 400 massage therapists have allowed their registrations to expire, which is more likely due to the rising costs and fees. In one instance, we actually heard of a member after attempting to register this year, a massage therapist was fined $1,155 for not registering after the initial registration period. And although the profession isn't licensed, their fees are mirroring that of a fully regulated profession. There's a disproportionate financial burden that is placed on massage therapists, and if all registrants renew their registration, OPR will collect approximately $350,000 in biannual renewal fees for an unlicensed profession. The fees for registration do not reflect an equitable fee structure given the low level of regulation at the moment. OPR has stated many times that they don't believe that licensure is necessary for the safety of the public, while also stating that the staggering fees are essential to the investigations that are going on to potentially make up for the wrongdoings or criminal activities. These two positions contradict one another as they are devaluing the need for licensure for public safety while using public safety investigations as a justification for fee increases. We not only advocate for licensure, but we believe it is the most appropriate level of regulation to ensure public safety. Until that time, we just ask for a reduction in registration fees to better reflect the current regulatory status of our profession. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That is good information to have. Thanks, Marty, yes.
Jada, thank you, for your testimony, and I agree that I had wanted, licensure, and it didn't end up that way. There is a provision in the bill that there's a report back about licensure of massage therapy establishments. Are you all supportive of that provision? I know it doesn't, it's just a report back about whether it should happen, but are you supportive of moving in that direction at least?
So we are supportive of ensuring that there's a standard of practice and ensuring that licensure takes place before we try to license the massage establishments. So we're leaning more in favor of promoting licensure and just reducing the fees at the moment because of the regulatory situation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, committee, how about we take a 10-minute break and then we'll go back for a while. Do we want to get Julia back this afternoon or do we want to put her on tomorrow? There's room on tomorrow's agenda. Let's do some committee discussions. Yeah, Julia, yeah, we'll decide. Okay.
You missing 2 committee members.
Where's Randy go? Up there. Would you like to go up?